Today's date is July 5th, 2016. My name is Leah Michelle Cash, and I am interviewing David Starr Rabb for the Archiving Black History in the Inland Empire project. David, his or her name is spelled, if you could spell your name for us, please.
Yes, David, traditional spelling, D-A-V-I-D, Rabb, spelled R-A-B-B.
We are interviewing here in the home of Wilma Carter and Retivo in the city of Rialto, California. Thank you, David, for taking time out to conduct this interview with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Okay, so first of all, we're going to start with, you tell us a little bit about your childhood. I understand that you were raised in the city of Perris, California.
Yes, I was born in Riverside Community Hospital, raised in Perris in the downtown area with my mother and father. My mother was a stay-at-home mom for the first few years of my life, and she worked as a house cleaner and later church secretary. My dad was a plumber. He was in his mid-40s when I was born, and was a plumber for approximately 40 years before retiring. I have one sibling, a younger brother about 2 years younger than me. We all lived in Perris, California, in downtown area. So it was a really good experience, having a close-knit nuclear family, going to the Perris public school system. I went to Perris Elementary, Palms Elementary, Pinnacotti Middle School, and graduated from Perris High School in 2004. It's amazing that's already 12 years ago. So I had a really good experience growing up in Perris, and had a lot of friends, a lot of neighbors, a lot of family. We all lived on the same street. My dad was the last of 11 children, and when I was growing up, 3 of them all lived in Perris, and they were slightly older than him, and he was already in his 40s. So we had a lot of family, a lot of cousins, second cousins, all in that area. So it was a really good experience in terms of having that family, that rock, that foundation growing up in Perris.
So I understand that you also were the valedictorian of your class at Perris High School. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I was co-valedictorian. Me and another student, we tied for valedictorian. There were about 4 of us that were constantly competing, attempting to get the best grades in high school. And ultimately I ended up tying with another student that went to UCLA. So I was valedictorian, class of 2004, got to give a speech at the Lake Elsinore Storm Stadium. It was a really good experience in terms of we had a friendly competition, so we were all working together to try to get the best grades. And I graduated, I think it was a 4.3 or 4 point, it was close to a 4.3. Was able to use that to get into Stanford University, where I graduated with a BA in political science in 2008.
So going back to that speech, do you remember a little bit about what that speech was about and how you felt as a young person representing the class of 2004, is it? How you felt as a young person representing the future for the class of 2004?
It was a very good experience. We were actually the first class to start high school in the 2000s and to end high school in the 2000s. We were actually the last class to graduate from high school without any sort of social media. Because if you remember, Facebook was launched February of 2004. It really didn't start taking off among college-age students till about a year later, and then high school students a year after that. We didn't have MySpace, so we were kind of like on the cusp of a new generation. My speech was actually on apathy, and it was talking about how a lot of people were just apathetic to the political systems, to what was happening in their communities, and it called for a lot of people to start getting involved. If you recall, that year was the presidential year. It was President Bush versus Senator Kerry, so people were really starting to get piqued about the political system. It was also a very important year because that was the year Barack Obama came onto the national scene. If you recall, he gave his speech to the Democratic Convention later that year. So a lot of things were happening that year. It was a year of transition. The speech was on apathy, getting people involved. And then 4 years later, you saw my generation get involved in electing President Obama. And you're starting to really see that generation of people born in the mid-'80s to late '80s really starting to get involved in the political system, really starting to get involved in national politics.
Standing out and being counted.
Mm-hmm.
So after high school, you leave the city of Perris, and that's when you go to Stanford University. So your experience at Stanford as a freshman, and what were your goals and your ideas that you were thinking at the time while you were there? We understand that you were a political science major.
Yes, it was actually very stressful from the beginning. was a first-generation college student. Both my parents had attended some community college at RCC and Mount San Jacinto Community College, but I was the first one out of my, I wouldn't say a whole family. I had a few people that went to Cal State San Bernardino or nearby to actually attend college. And on top of that, attending elite university like Stanford. It was sort of a culture shock coming from Perris, where most of the people were working class, even poor, and then being transferred over to that area. So it took a lot of getting used to, and my goals were just to complete my classes and do the best that I could. I ended up finishing that first quarter up with a 3.6 GPA, and that was after a lot of hard work and just really getting down and just studying. But overall, it was a very successful experience, the 4 years I spent as an undergrad at Stanford.
But what were some of your challenges in that first year? What were some of your successes in that first year? What did you pat yourself on the back?
I think my successes were finishing the first year very successful. Like I said, I got a 3.6, and then from there it was only up. I think I got a 4.1 the next quarter, and then a high 3. I don't recall what it was, but it was coming from that environment, not being used to that particular environment at Stanford, going there, doing very, very well academically. So that was what I was able to pat my back on. I finished up the year very successful after a really rough year of getting going from an area where it's a different kind of environment, different kind of outlook on life, and being kind of let go and on my own at Stanford and really being able to succeed. So I pat myself on the back for that. The challenges were really adjusting to that. When you're in high school, you have a structured schedule. You're in class 8 o'clock to 3, or a little bit in those parameters, you have your classes. In college, it's kind of easier to say, hey, I only have my class every other day, and to kind of get a little lax with the studying, but you're actually having to study more in college. So I think the challenge was not only the class differences, but also the differences in outlook in terms of structuring your schedule, time management. Coming from Perris High School and being valedictorian, it was really easy to get the homework done at an easy time. I was very, very focused on everything, and kind of changing that around where you had to study more, you were constantly studying, constantly writing papers, was a challenge that I want to say I only faced. A lot of college students face. So overall, it was a very successful experience.
Mm-hmm. So then when you graduate with a BA in political science. Mm-hmm. What made you choose political science?
Well, I was always interested in politics. I've followed politics since about the mid-90s. Around the time, I remember when Clinton was first elected president in 1992, I was about 6 years old. So since about that time, the last almost 23, 24 years, I've followed politics consistently. I've read the paper for about 20 years, starting in the mid-90s. So I'd always been interested in politics, whether it be local, state, national. So I wanted to pursue a major that I was already interested in. I already had a base of knowledge in. So I thought pursuing a degree in political science would be the best course of action. And I minored in history, which is also another subject I've always been interested in, particularly American history, with a subset of African American history. It's something I've followed since I was a kid. So I wanted to follow something that I was really interested in. So political science seemed the best course of action at that time.
Okay, so then also during that period or after that period of graduating in college, was that during the time when you also joined the U.S. Navy Reserves?
Yes, I joined the U.S. Navy Reserves. It was my sophomore year in college. At the time, the reserves, you would do a abbreviated boot camp, which I did the summer between my sophomore years and junior year. So that encompassed drill weekends, which met once a month, and then AT, annual training, which was a 2-week period. They would typically do either during the summer, or I would cut it in half, do during my vacation, spring break. We had a week off for Thanksgiving, and then portion during the summer. So the 1 weekend a month, I typically would drill down in San Jose. They had a NOS, a Navy Operational Support Center in San Jose, and they also had the Navy Postgraduate School in Monterey, which is over on Del Monte Street. We would provide security over there. So it was kind of a different kind of environment versus the Stanford environment. I think it made me a better person, a stronger man to really get that discipline in serving in the United States Navy Reserves. Shortly after law school, when I graduated in 2011, I deployed out to the United Arab Emirates. That was about a 7-month deployment for that portion of the deployment, preceded by a 3-month kind of getting ready for the deployment over at in Newport, Rhode Island. Were
you on a ship?
No, I actually was doing security over there, and I was working in the armory. There's a base in Dubai, the Port of Jebel Ali. A lot of ships stop over there, and we're working in the armory in terms of helping the security with their weapons, cleaning the weapons, getting everything inventoried in the Port of Jebel Ali. It was a good experience because typical deployment, you're in a camp or some kind of base. We actually stayed out in town. We're transferred every day via van over to the base, changed into our uniforms at base, worked our 12-hour shifts, got off, were transported back into the city of Dubai. So I did that in the port of Jebel Ali, and then there's another base, Fujairah, which is very, very, very small. I did the armory over there for a few months within that 7-month period. So overall, got to see a new culture, was really able to experience the culture, was able to go to the Mall of the Emirates, the Dubai Mall, able to shop at the local shopping centers, a place called Calif, which is like the super Walmart in that area. So overall, it was a really good experience. Got to meet a lot of people over on the East Coast because the vast majority of the people on the deployment were from Rhode Island, New York. So it's a different kind of culture once again. So overall, it was a very positive experience.
So now, having that experience of being in the U.S. Navy, having the experience of going abroad, having the experience of being a student, first generation student at an Ivy League college, and fulfilling the dreams of actually going through political science and history, wrapping all of that up, and then you pass the bar, you become a lawyer, and then you come back home to Paris. What made you make that decision?
Well, I'd always been drawn back to Paris. Third-generation residents. My grandparents moved out to Paris in 1940. I originally came from Louisiana, stopped in Imperial County for about a year. Then from Imperial County, they moved up to Paris because they had family out here in the city of Paris and worked in the agricultural industry. So I had long-standing roots in the city. I'd always come back every summer when I had a break. I would work at nonprofits. I worked at the Red Cross 2 summers during my undergrad. I worked at Legal Aid in Riverside County the first summer after law school, my first year of law school. The second year I worked at a local firm in the area, and I developed a hatred toward private practice or working for a firm at that time just due to the billable hours. So it was always in the city, always had family in the city. The vast majority of my spring breaks, Thanksgiving breaks, Christmas breaks, either if I wasn't drilling with the Navy, I was in Paris, making contact with old friends, old family. So there was always that place, Paris, within my heart. And eventually, after I had finished the bar, I worked at a nonprofit out in Los Angeles. Came back to Paris to help with my father. He's in his mid-70s. He had suffered a fall. So I came back to Paris, and what I realized was, despite the city doubling in size since I had graduated from high school, things still remained the same in the city. So that's ultimately was my decision to come back to Paris. It was very difficult in finding employment that would match my professional level, but ultimately it all worked out, and I returned back to Paris in 2013.
And so in that return, you wind up being elected as a council member for the city of Paris. So who were your mentors? Who inspired you? Who has been inspiring you through most of your journey that you have taken so far?
It'd be a ton of people, actually. I would first give honor to my parents. My mother, like I said earlier, she was a housekeeper, later church secretary. She had passed away during right before my senior year of high school. She was only in her 40s. She constantly instilled upon me and my brother that we needed to obtain an education. We needed to stay focused on what we needed to do in life. And not only did I graduate from Stanford, my brother graduated from UCR and is currently pursuing his master's degree, which is very rare in terms of people that grew up in downtown Paris, people that grew up in traditionally what would be considered a poor area of Paris, to obtain that level. So my mother, in terms of focusing in on getting an education, not only book smarts, but people smarts, experiences, going out there, trying new things that people might not traditionally try from our background. So it was my mother, and it was also my father. My father was in his mid-40s when we were born. So he was slightly older. He was the youngest of 11 children. He developed polio when he was 11 years old, 1952, 1953. He didn't let that get to him. He worked his way up as a plumber, was able to buy the house that I grew up in at 22, and he still owns it today, 52 years later, in his mid-70s. So he was always an inspiration because he didn't let anything get in his way. He always spoke out if anything was wrong was happening. He developed a pride of our culture, a pride of being black men to me and my brother. So my father and my mother were two of my main inspirations growing up in Perris, along with many other people in the city. We attended First Baptist Church of Perris under the leadership of Dr. Marvin L. Brown. He was pastor from we joined about 92, and he was pastor all the way up until his death in 2003. So he was an influence in terms of getting involved not only in the spiritual realm, but he was also involved in the local politics of the city. Those individuals, along with countless teachers, many of whom were still in the area, whether they be teaching or retired, a lot of the family I mentioned earlier. My dad had a sister and two brothers that lived on our street. His sister was about 20 years older than him, so she was already in her 70s. So getting that long-term view of history from my relatives really was able to, the catalyst that inspired me to go on and accomplish what I've been blessed enough or fortunate enough to accomplish in those years. So in that level, the people that were in my immediate presence, along with the historical figures that I read about growing up, I was always in the library in Perris, so I had an opportunity to read about the people of Martin Luther King, Booker T. Washington, who I always feel has been unfairly characterized as being an accommodationalist or an Uncle Tom, when he really taught self-reliance and hard work for black people. Marcus Garvey, who instilled a pride and culture of black people, and just people like that, people like Harry Truman, who worked his way up from poverty to become president, one of the most successful presidents and oftentimes underrated presidents. Bill Clinton, another individual that worked himself up from poverty to be one of our most accomplished presidents. And later on, after growing up, President Barack Hussein Obama, who also, despite all the hatred and negativity, has done a really good job as President of the United States. So those were some of my mentors, some of my heroes growing up, and who guided me and provided direction to me.
Okay. So now, you're practicing law.
Mm-hmm.
What type of law do you practice?
Yes, I'm currently employed by the County of San Bernardino's District Attorney's Office. I've been so about 14 months now. It's a really good experience. Have a various different varied caseload, a lot of good people who are really committed to the work. And it's really good to interact with all the different attorneys, the different public defenders, the different DAs, the different law enforcement agencies, to really provide justice. It's not about pursuing convictions. It's about providing justice. What's going to make the county of San Bernardino and the state of California a more safer place? And I think my background, having interacted with people of various backgrounds throughout the course of my life, have really provided the background for me to really approach it and look, am I approaching justice? And I think it's been a very, very good experience and a very, very hands-on and knowledgeable experience. So I've been doing that for about 14 months.
Okay. So now, as the council person for the city of Perris, and a young council person at that, what are some of your challenges and some of your successes that you could speak about that you see being a young person on the council at the city of Perris?
I'll start off with the successes. I think coming in as a younger person, I have a different outlook. I was one of the few people from the millennial generation. Those are the people born after 1981. That is an elective office in the Inland Empire. So I have a different outlook. I think I have a more cooperative spirit. I think that's a hallmark of our generation. We like to work with people. We don't like to undercut people, and I think that's a positive. I come in with a lot of energy. Not having any children, being single, I can devote a lot more time that someone in my position that would be married with kids would not be able to promote. So I provide a lot of energy. I think being on the younger side, I just turned 30 3 weeks ago. I can still relate to people in their 20s, late teens, and at the same time I can relate to people up into their 40s, mid-40s. So I have that ability to relate with the younger people that oftentimes aren't represented. And also as an individual who works a full-time job, in addition to serving the council, I can represent the people in Perris that are commuters, people that have to commute to San Diego, to Los Angeles, to San Bernardino, Riverside counties. Oftentimes their voices are not heard because the council meetings are held 6:30 on Tuesdays. A lot of times they're busy taking care of their children. They're busy still at work. They're commuting. So I have the ability to represent those people. In terms of the challenges as a younger person in the city of Perris as a councilman, I think a lot of times people see my age or they see my looks. Sometimes they might think I'm little bit younger than what I actually am. I'm 30. And they might think, well, he doesn't have the life experiences. They don't know all the stuff that we've talked about before. So they come at me kind of talking to me like I'm a child, to be frank with you. And I think that's one of the challenges. But I think the benefits definitely outweigh the challenges. And I think another challenge, serving in Riverside County, it's a county that's kind of still in the 20th century in a lot of respects. And I think people aren't used to seeing a black man of my age and my caliber as a leader. And I think that's been a challenge. But I think one of the quotes that I was taught from a young age from never beg for acceptance. Be who you are. Be firm, be disciplined, and give it your best. And if people are going to like you, they're going to like you. And that's been a challenge, is really not being taken seriously. And I think it's something that I'll just continue just to do my best, and in the end, God will work it out.
So for this digital project, this video is going to be viewed a lot, and it'll be a lot of young people who are going to come after you that are going to see this video. So, Councilman, what do you hope your legacy to be? And for the young ones coming after you, what do they think, or what do you think they're going to say to you? Job well done.
Okay. Well, I definitely hope that's the legacy I leave. I hope when people say David Starr Rabb, when he served on the council, whether it be 4 years, 8 years, or even more, that he was a voice for all the residents of Perris and provided steady leadership that represented what was the best interest for the community. And I think a lot of times people serving elective office, it becomes more, after they serve for a while, it becomes more about them or more about their donors. But I've always wanted to represent the residents, and I think the residents in the city of Perris want several things. I think, one, there's a negativity that's associated with Perris. When people hear Perris, they think, oh, it's ghetto, oh, it's backwoods, oh, it's not up to par. And I think serving as a councilman, by working to beautify the city, working to attract more retail, working to attract more employment opportunities, whether it be skilled labor or manufacturing labor, I think it's going to really change the view people have on the city of Perris. I want to get rid of that negative view of the city for people that are prospectively looking into coming into the city, and kids that are coming up through the system. I want them to say, you know, I come from Perris, there's challenges coming from Perris, but in the end it's going to make me a stronger person, a more effective person, a person that's going to do well in life. So that's one of the things I want to do, is just create a better kind of attitude toward the city of Perris. Another thing that's coupled with that is increasing the economic opportunities within the city of Perris. A lot of people have to commute to jobs, they commute far out. And I think if we're growing as a city and population, we're ultimately going to have to attract those middle wage jobs in the city. It's going to be beyond, you know, loading the city up with all these warehouses, logistics centers. We're going to have to create jobs that get people like me, people that have went out, obtained their education, want to work in the city of Perris. So those are two things kind of broad-based for the young people in the city. And the last thing I want to do, particularly for African American children, is to show that, you know, don't let the media dictate who we are as a people. I think a lot of times Fox News, CNN, they portray negative images of black people, particularly black men. And I think for the children coming up, particularly these kids that are coming up and this age, I think they're going to have to be strong. They're going to have to be made of steel. And I think they're going to have to know who they are, what they want, and they're going to have to build that economic base as a race of black people. And I want to be part of the vanguard of maybe really establishing that, being a mentor for those children and really helping lift them up. I think oftentimes African Americans, we see ourselves as individuals, and that's not really how we should view ourselves. We should view ourselves as a collective. And I think that's the way things were in Africa. We were more of a collective society. And I really want to be able to help provide guidance, help provide mentorship for these children, and just be an example of someone that's made it, but also be open and accessible. And I think that's where we're headed. And I think it's going to be very challenging times coming up for us as a people. And I really want to be someone that can provide guidance, someone that can provide inspiration for all these kids that are coming up in this new generation. So those are the things I want to do in terms of, I want them to, people look at my legacy, my service in the city council, my service as an attorney, my service just as a person, and say David Rabb really fought for the community. He really provided a role model for the community. And as a result of him walking on this earth, whether it be 30 years or 90 years, he really was a positive influence and really left the world a better place than when he found it.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Rabb, so much for this interview.
Thank you. It was a pleasure speaking with you today.
Yes.